Hi, welcome to Chad's Silversmithing. First, before you go too far, if you wouldn't mind hitting the like button, it helps to promote my channel. I really appreciate that. I'd also love to hear your comments and suggestions in the comment section down below. Today I'm going to do a fun ring, I think. We'll see how it turns out, but I'm going to be using a stone that was sent to me by one of my patrons, Lisa. She sent me a batch of stones very generously, and I love them, and I plan to use them in a number of projects in the future. So thank you, Lisa. I really appreciate that. This is a gorgeous little piece of crazy lace, and I hope I do it justice today. I'm going to try and do a ring that I haven't done exactly before. My wife has had this ring with a triangular inside band, and I was going to try and do something similar to that because I think it has kind of a cool look. And she says it's comfortable, so we'll give it a try and see how it turns out. Before we get started, though, I wanted to thank my patrons over on Patreon. They're a generous group of people with a lot of knowledge, so thank you for being such awesome supporters for my channel. I appreciate it. The other group is I wanted to thank my YouTube subscribers. We just passed 8,100, which is amazing. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate all the people buying me coffees and stuff too. That helps out with the supplies as I go through quite a bit when I'm making these videos. So thanks for that. I appreciate it. Also, just thanks for the nice comments and stuff that you put in the comment section. It's really gratifying to hear that people are enjoying this and getting something from it. So thank you for that. That helps make it even more fun to do. So with that being said, let's get started on this project. Okay, I drew up kind of a crude sketch of what I was going to do for this. It's not going to be a terribly complex ring, I don't think. There we go. This is my design idea book that I have available on my merch store if you're interested. I find I get better results when I draw things out in advance. When I was talking about the triangle band, this is kind of what it looks like. It's thicker on the corners down here, but it kind of has a nice curve on the bottom, then it goes more. It looks like a guitar pick on the inside, sort of. And I'm going to do that, but I'm going to do two of them, and I'm going to split them out like that for the bottom of this ring. The top is going to go around this. I'm probably going to try and make it a little bit tighter than that so it's not quite so big and not have these come out quite so far. And I think I'm going to use 12 gauge square to make the little marquee shape around it. I'm going to use 3/16 inch fine silver bezel for the bezel. I'll probably use 26 gauge or 22 gauge on the bottom for the bottom of the bezel. It depends on, maybe 22 for this one so it has some strength where it's attached. But I have some ideas about how to achieve this shape. I'm probably going to use 10 gauge square wire and do a little bit of forging on it, as well as maybe some sharp bending and soldering. So we'll see. But first, let's start with the bezel here. This is 26 gauge, which is a little on the thicker side, and I like that. I actually have 24, I saw. I never bought 24 before. I should try that sometime and see how I like it. If you haven't been to my channel before, I use hard silver sheet solder for pretty much everything, with a few exceptions. And I use Mighty Flux, which is a spray-on flux. This is such a pretty stone. Wow, what a generous gift. Thank you, Lisa. I've had several very generous people send me stones, and that's really very kind. Some other questions people ask me a lot. What torch do I use? I use a Smith acetylene air torch called the Smith Silversmith. Not very creatively. And I use a #1 tip on it generally, unless I'm melting stuff. The other question I get most frequently is these cutters are just Fisker's craft shears. So they work pretty well for sheet up to about, you can cut 18 with it, but it's putting a lot of strain on the pieces when you do that, or on the cutters. These ones, the handles are just about shot. Or at least the handle covers. Let's see, let's cut some solder. Solder if you're across the Atlantic. So for this one, I'm just going to do a plain bezel, and then I'll add this thing around the outside made out of square wire. So using slightly thicker sheet than I normally would, because the band is going to be attached to the bottom, and I want it to be a sturdy thing to be attached to. If you notice that I have a scratch on my nose, I was playing with the cat this morning and he got me. I got a little bit too close and he was a little too playful. So it's probably appropriate that I have the shirt on today with the cat reaching up with his paws. We'll go ahead and solder that down. I got plenty of solder here. So let's get this fluxed. Probably throw 6 or 7 of these ones in here. These are maybe like 2 millimeters. Sometimes if you want them to get up against the edge, if you heat the flux a little bit, it gets sticky, and if they're sliding around, move them up against the edge while you have the flux hot. Kind of glue them in place so they stay a little closer to the edge. Because you want them touching the bezel and the bottom. There's quite a, when you're using thicker sheet like this on the bottom, the hard part is getting the sheet up to the 1450 degrees it needs to be at in order to have the solder stick to it, whereas the bezel sitting on top is really exposed to the heat, so you got to kind of actively avoid the bezel. Or another option is to lift it up like this and get underneath it to heat it until it starts to flow. Then you can transfer up to the top, do it kind of quick. You've already got things flowing. I think we're good. I think we got a little space over here. I had a little gap on the bottom over there, so I was just trying to rectify that situation. Going to trim this off relatively close and then file it flush. When you're trimming off sheet around the outside of a bezel, you need to be a little careful you don't angle it under like that, because you'll cut right into the solder joint and then you'll have a gap. Nobody wants an unsightly gap on their bezel. What would people say? Okay, I think that's probably good enough. Almost good enough. Okay, so let's see. This is 12 gauge square. I'm hoping that's going to be enough. I think what I'm going to do is cut 2 equal length pieces that I think are long enough. And get the angle that I want on the end here correct by filing them that across sort of diagonally. I'll show you in a second, but solder the two together and then work on just how it fits around the bezel itself. So let me because I don't want this ring to be quite this long. I think that's just too long. So I'm just kind of eyeballing this. When you're bending square wire, if you're pretty new to this, square wire tries to twist when you bend it. And that's because you're asking the outer edge of it to bend, to stretch, and the inner edge of it to compress, and so it's trying to find an easier way. And if it went diagonally like that, it's easier to bend that way. So you have to stop periodically and correct your square wire, because it'll try to do that no matter how much you try and control it. I really had a hard time when I first started getting, especially when you're trying to bend two things to be exactly the same, getting them, you know, relatively close. It's surprising how subtle differences you can see even when they're pretty small. So I had a lot of frustration with that at first. The good thing is, the more you practice, the easier it gets. That looks pretty good to me, so I'm going to do this. I generally have a little pin floating around here somewhere. Doing here is trying to find the center point of the bezel there. Maybe about right there. I'm going to cut this off kind of at that angle. That's pretty nice, actually. I think what I'll do is I put some tool marks in here by playing with the pliers on it, so I'm going to go grind those off with the Dremel with an abrasive white wheel. I'll be right back. Like I said, I just kind of smoothed those out because they're going to be kind of an inaccessible area to clean up later on. So. So I want this to fit in there snugly, so I just squeezed it together a little bit. Let's see if I can get it in there. I may have squeezed too tightly. So that looks like it fits pretty good. And I think before I do this, though, I'm going to do a little bit of filing to kind of even this out. Might also check to make sure you don't have any wobbles, kind of waviness. I have a little tiny bit. That looks pretty centered, I think. Alright. So again, I'm going to try and make sure he's flat on the bottom here so everything's flush. And I'll probably just pick a little bit along the edge there on both sides. It should run the entire seam once you get it hot enough. So. So there's a lot more mass in the outer part here than there is in the bezel probably, because it's much thicker. So getting them both up to that temperature that we want, where it'll stick to both of them, can be challenging sometimes because it doesn't heat evenly, or you're not moving the torch enough, or whatever. But I'm going to add a little bit more solder on here. Okay, so now we're going to work on the band. So I did a little bit of problem solving off camera, and what I decided to do, and I just did it on one so I can do the other in front of the camera, was I took a piece of 10 gauge square wire and I cut a V notch with the edge of my file this distance apart on the, whatever this came out to be. I just basically I was trying to do it from here to here, so I measured that much for the distance between those two cuts. And then I added additional, more than I think I need here. And actually I'm going to straighten these up a little more so they don't curve quite so much, but now that I look at it. But I did a little bit of flattening on the, using my little bench block here. I did a little bit of curving on the inside with my chasing hammer like this, You could do that on a ring mandrel too. And then after I had a curve and it was a little bit thinner in the middle of each side, then I filed it a little bit and I took it over to the Dremel and used an abrasive white wheel to grind it smooth on the inside there. And I'll do a little bit more refining before I'm done, but I'm going to try and make a second one here in front of you so you can see what I did. So, okay. It's pretty close. Now what I want to do is, like I said, I'm going to file a notch. I should have pre-measured that when I did this other one, but I didn't. I should have. That would have been smart. I think maybe let's do a little hammering before we bend this next time. See how that works. So, like I said, you could do this over a ring mandrel too. This is just do a little bit in the center of each of these. Okay. Now, since I just work hardened that really seriously by pounding on it, let's soften it up again. You can do that by annealing, which is where you heat up the metal to the point where it's almost a dull red color, and then let it cool off. We'll let that cool for a minute. Alright, now I'm going to bend these in like that. How close we are on size when we bend this a little bit more. Oh, that's pretty close. Okay, so I think let's solder these corners. I have plenty of solder there, so just get it fluxed and put some in there. Now I'm just going to do some fine tuning to get them to match pretty well. Okay, let's do a little Dremel cleanup on this. See if we can get it to narrow down a bit. Okay. So I'm just going to kind of move it out of the middle. that's pretty close, I think. So I think we can go back to the other area and just do some hand shaping and filing, and we'll be ready to put these together and mount them. So I think they're similar enough to where I can run with it. I want these two to be sitting like this to make a spread out band for underneath the head of our ring, and so I need to file these at a little angle so that they fit together nicely. Pull those ends together. Spreads them about that much. That looks pretty good. So let's see if we can figure out a way to solder those, huh? One of the good things about these magnesia blocks is they're soft. So you can push stuff into them or poke stuff into them. That looks pretty good. Solder joint there. It's relatively straight. Close enough anyway. Our next step is going to be cutting this so that I can mount this on there. I think what I'll do is I'll cut them kind of like this at that angle. And then we'll compare them after we file them down a little bit. What I really care about is that all 4 feet are touching and that it sits evenly horizontally this way. I'm going to try and find the center between these two, and maybe that'll help me to line it up right. So we got 40, so it should be 20 right there. I think that'll help a little bit. So normally I would just set this here and do this, but I don't want this to fall at all, so let's push it into a magnesia block. That way nothing can drop. Figure out where I chucked my tweezers in. I always just, when I'm done with the tool, I just kind of throw it to the side. Which is a bad habit, I suppose. I just want to make sure I have contact with the base and the band itself with the piece of solder. The base will be harder to get hot because it's partially buried in this pad. I'll put a little bit more in the band. Okay. It's a pretty good sized ring. Probably if you had a smaller stone, downsize it a little bit so it's not. I think that's going to be pretty cool. So let's let that pickle for a while. And when I come back, we'll set the stone and I'll show you the final product. I get asked a lot about why I don't show polishing, and part of the reason is because I made a video just so I wouldn't have to show that every time. And there's actually two videos. There's one called polishing or getting a good polish or something like that. I'll put a link right there for that. And the other one is pre-polishing, which I use my rotary tool to kind of clean things up before I actually get to the polishing machine. That's put a link right there. So, be back in a few. So I got everything polished. Oh my, nice polishing here, Chad. So I got everything polished and I'm ready to set the stone. I've got it seated in there, and I do this a little differently than some people. Most people use a bezel pusher and a burnishing tool. I just use this to do the pushing and the outer part of my needle nose here, or chain nose, to smooth out that top edge, which is called burnishing. So first I'm just going to go straight in like that while putting some pressure on the stone downwards. One of the common mistakes I see that people make when they're beginners, and I did this myself, is I would set stones too deeply inside of the bezel so that too much of the bezel was trying to curve over the stone, and it would cause wrinkles. And so what you want to do is just set it so that the top of the bezel just barely gets a grab on the initial curve of the stone as it starts to curve inwards, so that the stone is sitting up pretty high so you can see the stone really well, but it's also got a secure grip on the curve where it starts. So that helps you to look more finished and professional, I think, on your piece. So last step, burnishing. I'm just going to take that top edge and rub it smooth. And on this one, again, I'm using quite a bit of pressure. Nice tight bezel up against the stone there, keeping it secure and makes it look nice and finished. So I think we're done. Not a fancy ring. One of the reasons I picked a real simple kind of geometric shape to go with this one is I like the contrast between nature's crazy patterns like this crazy lace agate, which are random and fun and whimsical, but then you got this kind of like geometric shape surrounding it, so it kind of frames it in an interesting way in my mind. So that's why I like the contrast of the two. So I'll do some final cleanup on that and get some better pictures and put them at the end. So hope you enjoyed it.